Climate change. Scientific research is increasingly linking our food production and distribution systems to climate change and the energy crisis, uncovering deep-seated problems with our agricultural infrastructure. Leaders from many faith traditions are now calling for politicians, business leaders, the agriculture industry, and religious institutions to assume more responsibility for our planet's health. Ordinary people, not just environmentalists or those working for social justice and rights issues, but people who are busy balancing issues of everyday living, are recognizing that the true cost of food far exceeds what we pay at the cash register. These costs include global warming, pollution, the destruction of ecosystems, and the degradation of fresh water supplies and arable land. Hunger. We waste over 3,000 pounds of food per second in the United States. According to the Department of Agriculture, each year, 27% of the food produced for human consumption in America is lost at the retail, consumer, and food service levels. That's nearly 1.5 tons of food for every man, woman, and child in the United States who faces hunger. Globally, 4.3 pounds of food are produced daily for every woman, man, and child on Earth, enough to make all of us fat. Yet, every year, 6 million children across the globe die as a result of hunger and malnutrition. That's one child dying every 5 seconds. Hunger and malnutrition are responsible for more deaths in the world now than AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. Trade. Now, in a system of free trade, agricultural goods and services flow among countries unaffected by government-imposed restrictions like tariffs, taxes, and quotas that generally increase the costs of goods and services to both consumers and producers. Proponents assert that free trade makes society more prosperous and qualitatively improved by increased commerce. Free trade has been said to decrease war, reduce poverty, enrich culture, enhance security, and increase economic efficiency. Free trade is also understood as a sovereign right of free nations. In a system of fair trade, agricultural goods and services flow among countries based not only on classic economic considerations, but also social, environmental, labor, and sustainability requirements. Fair trade relies on consumer readiness to pay slightly more for products that empower rather than exploit vulnerable populations. Most fair trade standards also mandate progress requirements that ensure continuous improvement in the conditions of workers, communities, and their environment. Fair trade advocates suggest that we should be at least as concerned with sustainability, environmental considerations, and fairness as we are with efficiency as measured in dollars and cents. Also, we must recognize that the conditions in which free trade might lead to the best outcomes are not present in much of the global South with whom the North trades. These include classic economic assumptions such as perfect market information, access to credits and markets, and the ability to change equipment and techniques in response to changing market conditions. Labor. Historically, large farms in the United States consistently depended on poorly paid labor, often to the point of exploitation. Much of our agricultural systems were built on the backs of indentured and enslaved agricultural workers, and in the 21st century, farm workers remain among the lowest paid laborers in our economy. In recent centuries, immigrants from Europe have been able to leave America's fields within a single generation. Immigrants from Africa, Latin America, Asia, the Caribbean, and the Pacific Islands have fewer options, however, and disproportionately toil under inhuman conditions for less than living wages for generations. In addition to its low wages, agricultural labor today features some of the economy's most dangerous jobs. From physical demands to operating unfamiliar and ill-maintained equipment, to exposure to animal bacteria and massive doses of chemical pesticides and fertilizers. Agricultural work ranks as the second most dangerous occupation, according to the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. And workers who do not speak or read English are often at greater risk for injury due to insufficient notification of occupational hazards. Neocolonialism. Neocolonialism exists when a nation or state appears sovereign and independent, but has its economy, politics, and or culture largely directed from the outside, often by former colonial or imperial powers. Modern trade, immigration, and foreign aid policies in Europe and the United States continue to exacerbate the historic ravages of colonialism for indigenous and subjugated peoples worldwide. Poor regions of the world shift from producing crops that support their self-sufficiency to cash crops, valued by the dominant world economy, like cotton, tobacco, sugar, tea, rice, coffee, cocoa, bananas, pineapples, corn, soybeans, and livestock. Now, combined with free market economic assumptions, this perpetuates dependent, inequitable relationships and a system of poverty, malnutrition, and exploited labor. Because indigenous and poor populations lack access to traditional hunting, gathering, and farming lands, they must resort to foreign diets, whose poor quality and highly processed nature lead to nutrition-related diseases. Environmental justice. Just as power in society has been misused to oppress various social groups in the United States, people of color, women, GLBTQ people, people with disabilities, and so on, power has been misused to create vast areas of environmental devastation throughout the world and to thwart attempts at environmental reform and preservation. Today there is a growing realization that negative environmental impacts disproportionately burden socially marginalized groups in developing countries abroad. Now, proponents of environmental justice argue that one of the significant reforms needed is a shift in the dominant worldview that commodifies land and objectifies living things. Proponents of environmental justice encourage a shift from viewing the environment as a resource to exploit, to a web of interconnected living things and the source of life itself. In addition, proponents advocate for prioritizing the needs of low-income people, people of color communities, and other oppressed groups who disproportionately lack access to nutritious food, clean air and water, parks, recreation, health care, and education, transportation, and safe jobs. Self-determination, participation in decision-making, and gaining control over land and resources are also key components, since justice-making activities, not accountable to oppressed communities, tend to simply perpetuate the very oppression they try to fight.